Okay, we are going to continue with part 4 of Ransom, and we're going to start in page 177 and we're going to go to 187 in this section. It's only 10 pages, but it's probably the 10 pages that I've taken the most notes in the whole novel, and so I do anticipate that it may take quite a while to get through it, especially pausing as we do to things that we need to unpack, analyze, and really understand what's happening. So we're starting at the top of 177 here where this line is. So remember that they're inside the Greek camp, and mostly this section is told from the narrative perspective of Achilles. And Achilles has come face to face with Priam. He believed at the beginning it was his father, and that softened his heart enough so that he is now engaging in a conversation with Priam. And all this has happened so quickly and so quietly in this darkened corner of the hut that the rest of the men, the Myrmidons, at the big mess table actually aren't aware of the extraordinary happening in their midst. So only the three, Achilles, Alcimus, and Automedon, are aware. Everyone else is still chatting, raising their cups, drunken toasts, and this gives the moment a dream-like quality. The tenderness of the earlier mood is still strong upon him. So that's the earlier mood is because he thought it was his father. Now, I've written just a note on the side here. Is this Hermes' influence or another god perhaps? Or is this just happened by chance? It is not something we need to know necessarily, but certainly something that's interesting for me as part of the text. How did David Malouf intend it? So beyond this old man who claims to be Priam, king of Troy, hovers the figure of his father, which is too immediate in Achilles' mind, too disturbing to be pushed aside. So again, is that figure, well, I think it's in Achilles' mind because that's what he initially thought, but perhaps there might be something supernatural in that too. He makes a sign to Alcimus to go after Automedon. So they've been sent, Automedon and Alcimus have been sent to find out who is this Idius, who is this herald, is this true, this story that he just came in a cart. But Alcimus refuses to leave his master alone. And sure, before they know it, Automedon is back with a second old man who is sturdier than the first. So this is Somax, who is described as shock-headed. That's a couple of times he's been described like that. I don't even know what shock-headed means, but we get the idea that he's stocky. He is dressed in a homespun coarse robe, and interesting, from the perspective of Achilles, he bears no resemblance to Idius, the Trojan herald, who Achilles has seen on at least 3 previous occasions. So he knows it's not actually the original Idius. But Automedon says that there was a wagon there loaded with treasure, but it's just an ordinary hay wain. This fellow is the driver. He's argumentative, stubborn. He didn't want to leave his mules. Interesting, because mules are also given the quality of being stubborn. Perhaps there's a parallel there that may be intended. Achilles asks, "Are you Idius?" And he's puzzled. One, by the claim that this rough-looking fellow is Idius, but also puzzled by this situation that's already passed beyond anything he has a precedent for. So what that means, unprecedented, it's a word that you could use in your essays instead of new, something that's never happened before. So a precedent we're setting is when something happens and then we know how to react, or we know how to act in that situation. When something has never happened before, it's unprecedented, there's no precedent, therefore there's no way of acting. So he, however, feels quite easy despite the warning. Now the carter, who's alarmed by the fact that he's been brought into this business, and this is interesting because we now actually have a section where we break into the narrative perspective of Somax. So he's been asked, "Are you Idios?" And he scratches his head, he rubs his nose, there's these physical gestures of uncertainty that we see. And Achilles asks again, "Are you the famous Idios?" Idios, how to answer. Well, of course he isn't. He is Somax. He's a workman, and this morning he just happened to be standing in the marketplace waiting to be hired when these two strangers appeared who just happened to be the king's sons. Note the repetition of this phrase, "just happened," especially emphasizing this theme of chance, which that chance versus destiny, which occurs throughout the novel. And so he just happened to be standing there and they happened to notice beauty. And how can he explain all of this? And how can he explain, and Priam is there, so how can he explain that this king, who is in his care, perhaps even his responsibility, and even though he has this grave authority, he is innocent of the world, childlike. Remember that extended metaphor of Priam being like a child. He is innocent like a naked newborn and just as helpless. And so he answers, "Well, if you please, sir, Idios is the name they have given me, because the king's helper is always called that." And today, the king's helper, he almost said companion, perhaps indicating the closeness of their relationship and the fact that it certainly wasn't like a submissive, autocratic relationship like a king and servant. The uniqueness of that pairing along their journey. And this kind of stumbles around, about to talk about the treasure. He just doesn't know what to say. And at this point, Priam intervenes, and Priam says, "He called this man my herald because of an ancient custom of having a herald to drive the chariot, but this herald may speak for me if needed, but on this occasion I mean to speak for myself." And I think that's significant, which is also an unprecedented action, that the king would talk for himself. So this good man has come along to drive the treasure, but don't ask too much of him. That would be a great courtesy. He's just a carter. "You have done me a good service," he says. "Whatever happens here, I should thank you for it. And I'd be very sorry if any harm were to come to you, but we are now in other hands." His companion, Somax, now rubs his nose again, perhaps indicating his nerves. He makes little deprecatory gestures that suggest he hasn't done that much. And Achilles watches the byplay, which is like the interactions between the two old men. And you notice the contrast here, or that juxtaposition. So we have that juxtaposition of the two characters. They belong to such different worlds. The humility of one, the awkward shyness of the other, all because it were preceded as if it was just a matter strictly between the two of them. He had no place here. So it was like a private conversation. The unfamiliarity of it, the unlikeliness, takes him out of himself and amuses him. So all of these things are happening that would cause Achilles to react in a way that he would perhaps not ordinarily react. And so Alcimus is instructed to take Somax out and see that he's fed, and also his mules. And so the carter is escorted out, and Priam feels emboldened to go on. And this begins a section where he appeals to Achilles as a father, not as a king, not his ceremonial self, but his actual self. And so we're at page 182 now. And he says, he appeals to him as a father by referring to him and his child. So remember Neoptolemus, anyway, so you are the father of a son you have not seen for more than half of his lifetime. So that's Neoptolemus. And he's growing up in his grandfather's house back home. And imagine it was his body that was lying out there unconsecrated after 11 days and nights in the dust, the body of a son for whom you have the father's soft affections, to whom you owe sacred duties that nothing in this world can cancel. Yeah. So imagine it was you. Do you ever imagined that when I was a young man as you are now, that I would in old age come to this, to stand as I do, undefended before you, with no sign about me of my royal dignity, begging you, Achilles, as a father, as one poor mortal to another, to accept the ransom I bring and give me back the body of my son. Not only because these treasures, the cups and other trifles, are a proper equivalent. How could they be? These treasure is not a replacement for any value that you set upon them for what you've lost, but because it does high honor to both of us as to act as our fathers and forefathers have done throughout our ages, and show that we are men, children of the gods, not ravening beasts. So it's appealing to that shared humanity. There's appeal to the fact that he is not using his royal identity. He's coming to him just as a father. And so Achilles sinks into himself is the expression here. Priam's evocation. So by referring to Neoptolemus, by evoking the image of him, he's touched a sore spot, an ache long suppressed. So 9 years ago, he was just a child. He was 7 years old. So it must be now he's 16. He has flaming red gold hair, a saddle of freckles across his nose. Okay. And now he's tried to picture the 16, hard-bodied, full of manly resolution. Okay. His son is ready to prove himself, to leave home and set sail for Troy and become a Myrmidon. Okay, 184. So he's trying to beg his grandfather, let me go and be a Myrmidon. But when he thinks of it, because he's haunted by this old affection, he remembers the swaggering child, and he can remember the small mimic hero, perhaps who mimics his father. He's posturing with his miniature sword. So he's trying to act like Achilles. Priam says, do you know, as I do, what we men are? We are no mortals, not gods, we die. And I think that is an interesting foreshadowing here. Death is inevitable. They are shared by death. Every human being is shared by the fact that death is in our nature. Without this fee paid in advance, the world does not come to us. This is a hard bargain that life makes with us, all of us, everyone, and the condition we share. Again, appealing to that shared humanity, the shared mortality. And so we should not pity one another's losses, because the sorrows come to everyone. Think, Achilles, think of your son Neoptolemus. Would you not do for him what I am doing for Hector? Would your father Peleus not do the same for you? You know, anybody that's a father would strip himself of all the ornaments of power. I really like that quote. And with no concern, no pride, no distinction, do what is most human. Yeah, so humble, stripped of all the dignity, all the ornaments of power, come and become a plain man, white-haired and old, and beg, entreat the killer of his son, with whatever small dignity is left, to remember his own death. Do these things honorably among us, to take the ransom I bring, and give me back my son. So we could just pause for a moment and remember the fact that actually Priam is confronting his son's killer, who has dragged his son's body around for 11 days, and he's begging him. And so the stillness that follows, because the noise that the men are making no longer comes to his ears. So even though there's noise there in the mess, he's not feeling any noise. It feels still. And Achilles comes back, and it's a remembrance of the standing on that beach, which was the setting of part 1. Beyond the line of the ships, he stared at the gulf and felt that it was not space his mind was being drawn into, but time. This is the second time this is referred to. And you know what? I am so confused by what it means to stare into time, not stare into space. But perhaps, again, it's referring to that idea that things are unchanging, that there's cycles that repeat, that there's a sense of destiny, that I don't even know. What does it mean to stare into time rather than staring into space? If you can work it out, let me know, because it's so confusing. But anyway, so in the aftermath of Priam's words, he sees beyond Priam and the other man, who was Peleus, and beyond him another man himself, the old man he will never be. And at this point, okay, he has like a premonition of his own death. Premonition. So he's struck by a coldness, okay, that he has never known, not even on deepest winter nights. Ice ribs round him with an iron grip. Well, this is like the coldness of death. And that is referred to explicitly, the next sentence, the coldness of that distant star that is the body's isolation in death. Yeah. So he's having a premonition of his own death and the fact that he will never be an old man. So he's seeing these again, whether that's supernatural vision, actual things, or his own imagination. We don't know. Maybe David Malouf knows. 186. And then the ice cracks, and there is the heat and the noise of the hut. And here, when he looks up again, there is around everything he sees a reddish glow. And so there is a new glow, not that silvery shimmering glow with the gods, but a reddish glow, as if his eyeballs were awash with blood. So imagine like red film on the camera, and there's a fireball that comes whistling through the air. And this is, I've written here, question mark, is it a vision? It is definitely a flash forward. Okay. So, by the way, the literary term for a flash forward is prolepsis. Okay, so that's a literary technique. But is it a vision, or is it a jump in the narration? I think in this sense, it's a vision. I think later on, we actually have a flash forward as part of the narration in part 5. I think here it is a vision that he's having, and this is a vision of Priam's death. And when Priam spoke about mortality and everybody dying, he evokes his own death, has actually let in the fearsome instrument of it. This, I have no idea. This is so confusing. But basically, Priam's death is by Achilles' son Neoptolemus, and he avenges his father in this vision. Okay, so he sees Priam go sprawling. He hears the armed fury shout into the dark. So this fury, okay, is his son. And Achilles is soul struck. It is his own son. What he has witnessed is the illumination vision of the moment, as Priam has called it up, is a time to come, the end of things in the day after his death. So after Achilles' death, it's the end of things. So this hiss is Achilles. Priam is impelled by the look of annihilating revenge that has struck the man. So Priam, I guess Priam is not witnessing any of this vision. He just notices that there is a look of revelation, that has struck the man, and he falls to his knees. So something in Achilles' expression changes at having this vision of Priam's death at the hands of his son. And Priam falls to his knees in response. So he clasps Achilles' hand, but he's not begging, which is the way that he imagined he would be coming to Achilles, but he's doing it out of fellowship, out of instant fellow feeling. So companionship, shared humanity, shared suffering, shared death. And so this scene that Priam imagined in his mind is actually acted out after all. Okay, but not in begging, but a different way. And Achilles mistakes the gesture for more begging. And with this look of horror, he pushes the old man off and says no more. And his voice is raw with anguish. You will have what you have come for. So he has this anguished reaction to this old man now begging. And Priam sobs. Achilles ignores the sob and rejects the attempt to clasp his knees. No more, please. When Hector's body has been washed and prepared, we will eat something together and you can rest. Till then, my attendants will see to you. And so that is the end of that little section. We're at 187 now. Honestly, again, there so much of this section is suggested at, hinted at. It's open to so many different interpretations, which makes this Ransom such a great text. So you may want to think about how you interpret this 10-page section, the conversation here. Why does Achilles have such a transformation? What about this conversation with Priam, and seeing the fact that his son causes Priam's death, and a vision of his own death, a premonition, vague premonition of his own death, how this is all intertwined in a complete about-face, a complete transformation of the way that Achilles sees the world. It certainly is something to think about, your interpretation of it. Okay, thank you so much. We're going to continue with the final section, which goes from 187 all the way through to 201 in the next video.